There's a ranch at the bottom of Coldwater Draw that men will ride 2 extra days to avoid. Not because of snakes, not because of the drop, because the last 3 families who tried to hold it left in the middle of the night and never said why, and the one man who stayed, they found sitting on his porch with his boots on and his eyes open, gone stiff, staring up the mountain at something nobody else could see. I know all that because I'm the fool who went down there anyway. I'm going to tell you what I found waiting below. I'm going to tell you about the woman nobody warned me about, the one the whole valley pretended didn't exist. And I'm going to tell you the truth, even the part I've never said out loud, even the part that still wakes me up when the wind comes off the high snow a certain way. But you have to promise me one thing before I start. When I get to the end, and you'll know when we're there, don't you dare feel sorry for her. She wouldn't have stood for it. And after everything she carried, neither will I. So sit, bank the fire, this one takes a while. The first thing I did every morning was count. Fence posts, cattle, cans in the cellar, the number of days since it last rained. I'd been doing it so long I'd stopped noticing, the way a man stops hearing his own breathing. My mother used to say I counted because I couldn't hold still and couldn't hold my tongue, and this was the one thing that let me do both at once. She's been dead 19 years. I still count. I even counted her, at the end 22 breaths a minute, then 19, then 11, then a number I've spent my whole life trying to forget and never once managed. So when I say I counted 41 buzzards over Coldwater Draw that October morning, understand that I know it was 41. I don't round, not even for you. 41 buzzards means something big died, or something big is dying slow, and either way it's a fool's errand to go look. I was already a fool. I bought the notion that a man could ride into a place everybody feared and come out with a story worth telling, and maybe a ranch worth having, because the deeds down there were selling for pennies, and I was a man with more grit than sense, and a saddlebag full of neither money nor good judgment. My name doesn't matter much to this. Folks called me Wren, on account of I was small and I sang to my horse and I never shut up, all 3 still true. I sat my mare, her name was Pete, don't ask, on the ridge above the draw, and I looked down at the ranch they called Coldwater, and I felt the hair on my neck lift the way it does before lightning. It was a good ranch. That was the wrong part. That was the part that turned my stomach. A bad place looks bad, sagging, sun-killed, half-swallowed by the country. Coldwater looked tended. The corral was mended. The garden was weeded in straight rows. There was wash on the line, snapping white in the wind, and smoke coming thin and blue from the chimney, and it was the most peaceful thing I ever saw, and I have never in my life wanted so badly to turn a horse around and ride home. Because everybody knew Coldwater was empty. Everybody knew the last man died on that porch a full season back. I'd heard it in 3 towns. I'd heard it from a freighter who spat when he said the name. Empty ranches don't hang wash. I sat there a long, long time. Pete stamped and blew. The buzzards wheeled. And I did the thing I always do when I'm scared past sense. I started talking. All right, I told the mare. All right. Somebody's alive down there, and that's not spooky, that's just a person, and I've been to more funerals than I've had hot dinners, and none of the dead ever hurt me half as bad as the living, so I clicked my tongue. So we go down, slow, hands where they can see 'em. We went down slow. Halfway down the draw, the temperature dropped like I'd walked into a root cellar. That's a real thing. Coldwater's called Coldwater for a reason, the way the mountain's shadow sits on it. The way a spring somewhere under the rock keeps the air heavy and wet even in a dry year. But knowing the reason doesn't help your body. My body thought it had ridden into a grave, and my body has never once been wrong about that in a way I could afford to ignore. There was a smell too, under the wood smoke, Swedish and wrong, and I knew it because I'd smelled it in the war and I'd smelled it at my mother's, and I've smelled it since more times than a man should. The buzzards weren't wheeling for nothing. I found the source before I found the woman. There was a fresh grave beside the barn. Freshish. A month maybe. Somebody had dug it deep and set the stones careful, and there was a cross of 2 peeled saplings lashed with rawhide, and no name on it because whoever dug it couldn't spell, or wouldn't, or there was nobody left who'd have read it anyhow. And past the grave, in a lean-to, there was a milk cow down on her side, ribs going like a bellows, dying of something, and that was the sweet-strong smell, and I remember thinking, with the strange flat clarity a scared man gets, she's been trying to save that cow and losing. "Hello, the house," I called out. My voice came thin. I hate my voice when it comes out thin. "Hello, I mean no harm, I'm just a man and I've got water and I've got a strong back and I saw your cows poorly." "Nothing." The wash snapped on the line. Somewhere up the mountain, a rock came loose and went ticking down, and my heart went with it. "Ma'am," I tried again, softer, because I'd decided it was a ma'am because of the wash, because the garden rows were too fussed over for any man I ever knew, because of 100 small things a man reads without letting himself know he's reading them. "Ma'am, I know you're there. I'm not gonna come in. I'm gonna sit right down here in the dirt where you can watch me, and I'm gonna wait, and you can decide about me in your own time." And I sat down in the dirt. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't kindness, not clean kindness. I was terrified, and sitting is what you do with a spooked horse or a spooked dog or a spooked anything. You make yourself small. You stop being a shape that's coming toward it. I sat down because every animal instinct I owned told me the thing behind that door was more frightened than me and twice as dangerous for it. I was right on the first count. I was wrong, thank God, on the second. She came out after the sun had moved a full hand across the yard. I'd counted it, a full hand, my fingers held up against the light, the old sailor's trick my father taught me before he drowned. I heard the latch first. Then the door came open just a crack, then wide, and she stood in it with a rifle that was too big for her and too old for anybody, and pointed dead at the middle of my chest. I've had guns pointed at me. It's a specific kind of quiet that comes over a man. Everything gets very simple and very loud. She was Lord. How do I say what she was without lying to make it prettier? She was gaunt, cheekbones like a fence rail, hair that had been braided a long time ago and hadn't been touched since, coming apart at the edges. She wore a dead man's coat, too big, cuffs turned back 3 times, and under it a dress worn to the color of dust. Her hands were steady on the rifle, and her eyes were not steady at all. Her eyes were doing the thing I'd seen in soldiers who'd been out too long past when their souls could follow, looking at me and looking through me, deciding whether I was real. She didn't say hello. What she said was, "You come to take the ranch." Not a question, flat, cracked like a voice does when it hasn't been used in a while. "No, ma'am. They all come to take the ranch." "I came 'cause I'm a fool who follows buzzards," I said, and I don't know why I said the true thing instead of a smart thing, except that lying to those eyes felt like a sin I'd pay for. "And 'cause your cow's dying, and it's making a sound I can't ride away from." Something moved in her face, just a flicker. The rifle didn't lower, but something behind it wavered. "Cow's not mine," she said. "No. Nothing here's mine." And then, and this is the part that got into me and never came out, she looked past me, up the mountain, up at the high dark timber and the snow above it, and she said in a completely different voice, a soft one, a waiting one, "He'll be down. He said he'd be down before the snow. You'll want to be gone when he comes." I turned and looked up the mountain too. I couldn't help it. There was nothing there. Rock and timber and the first white of winter sitting on the peaks. "Who's coming down, ma'am?" She didn't answer that. She said, "You can water your horse. Then you go." And she lowered the rifle at last, not because she trusted me, I understood later, but because her arms simply couldn't hold it up anymore, and she was too proud to let me see them shake, so she made it look like a decision. That's the first thing I ever knew for certain about her. She would rather look cruel than look weak. Remember that. It matters later, more than anything else I'll tell you. I didn't go. You knew I wouldn't. I watered Pete slow at the trough, and I kept my back half to the woman so she wouldn't feel watched, and I studied that ranch out of the corner of my eye, and I read it the way you read a track. And what I read scared me worse than any ghost story. The freighter spat at me. One person had been keeping this place. One. You could see it in the choices, the near garden weeded, the far one gone to seed. The corral mended on the side you could reach without a ladder. Water hauled, but only so far. There was a dry stock tank up the slope she'd plainly given up on. It was the arithmetic of a single body doing the work of a family, and losing the war acre by acre and refusing to admit the front line was collapsing. And there was the grave, deep dug careful, 1 month gone. And there was her, saying he'll be down before the snow, looking up a mountain where nothing living moved. I'm not a fast man, but I got there. I got there standing at that trough with my hand on my horse's wet neck. The man they buried a season ago on the porch, that was the last one, the one 3 towns knew about. But there'd been another after him. This grave was fresh, and she was still setting a place. Still doing wash. That white on the line, I realized with a lurch, was too big for her, cut for a man's frame. Still saying he'd come down. He wasn't coming down. He was already down. In the ground. By the barn. Under 2 peeled saplings lashed with rawhide, dug by hands that shook, by a woman who then went back inside and would not, let the fact of it into the front of her mind, because the fact of it was the last thing holding the roof up, and the second it came in the whole sky would fall. I have carried some heavy things in my life. I want you to know that in that minute, watching my horse drink, I would have traded any of them not to have understood what I understood. I didn't say it. God, no, you don't walk up to a person standing on the last plank over a drop and shove them. I said instead, easy as I could make it. That cow. She's suffering, ma'am. If it were mine, I'd end it kind tonight, and I'd butcher what I could save, 'cause winter's coming and meat's meat. You want, I'll do the hard part. You don't ever have to touch it. She stared at me a long time. He wouldn't want a stranger's hands on his cow, she said. Then I'm not a stranger, I said. I'm Wren, and now you tell me yours, and we're acquainted, and it's your cow, and I'm asking your leave. I watched her fight it. I watched a whole life go across that woman's face. I think she'd been someone's daughter and someone's wife and someone's mother, and I think all of them were gone. And I think she'd been alone so long that a name spoken kindly was almost more than she could bear, worse than the rifle, worse than the grave. Nadine, she said finally, so quiet the wind nearly took it. My name is Nadine. Nadine. I nodded like she'd handed me something worth keeping, because she had, pleased truly. Now the cow. She looked at the lean-to. She looked up the mountain one more time, the way you'd glance at a locked door, checking. Then she said the bravest small thing I ever heard a person say, and she said it like it cost her the last coin in her pocket. Yes, all right, yes, do it kind. And she went inside so she wouldn't have to see, and I did it kind. And while I worked I could hear her through the thin wall, not crying. She was past crying, just talking, low and steady, to somebody who wasn't there. Telling him a stranger came. Telling him the cow was poorly. Telling him he'd best hurry down before the snow. I dressed out the cow by lantern light with my jaw set so hard it ached the next day. And I made myself a promise over that carcass that I had no right to make and no idea how to keep. I was not going to let her spend the winter waiting for a dead man alone. That night I slept in the barn because she wouldn't have me in the house and I wouldn't have left, and the 2 facts made a truce in the straw. I lay awake a long time. The mountain wind came down off the snow and worked through the boards, and it made a sound, I swear to you. It made a sound almost like a man's low voice, far off, calling, and I understood then how 3 families had run in the night, and I understood it wasn't ghosts. It was worse than ghosts. It was arithmetic and grief, and a woman keeping a light in the window for someone who was never, ever going to come down that mountain, and any decent person who stumbled into the middle of it would feel the truth of it in their skin like cold water and want to run. I didn't run. I got up in the black hour before dawn, and I found a stub of pencil in the back of a feed bill, And by the last of the lantern I started to write it all down, the count of the buzzards, the grave by the barn, the wash on the line cut for a man's frame, the name she'd given me like her last coin. Nadine. I wrote it careful. I've always counted things because I couldn't hold still and couldn't hold my tongue. Turns out I was about to learn there are some things you can't count your way out of. And up the mountain in the dark, the snow was already starting to come down. I woke to it and I knew right away the numbers had gone against me. 4 inches on the barn's north sill. Pete's water skinned with ice. The draw gone soft and white and silent, that particular silence that isn't peace. That's the silence of a door easing shut behind you. I've lived my whole life in country that means to kill you, and I've learned its manners. First snow in October this high, in a draw this cold, is the mountain clearing its throat, telling you it's decided. Telling you that whoever's down here now is down here till spring, or down here for good, and it doesn't much care which. I lay in the straw doing the sums, and none of them came out kind. I had a horse and enough grain for her for maybe 3 weeks. I had a woman who wouldn't have me in the house and wouldn't leave the ranch and was slowly starving in a coat that used to belong to a dead man. I had a smokehouse with 1 butchered cow in it and a garden gone half to seed. And I had a promise I'd made over a carcass in the dark, which in the light of a white morning looked exactly like what it was, the promise of a fool. But here's a thing about me you should know since you've come this far. I don't break promises made to the dying or the grieving, not because I'm good, because I made one once and broke it, and the breaking is the number I told you I've spent my whole life trying to forget. So I don't do it twice, whatever it costs. That's not virtue. That's just an old wound that's scarred, crooked, and healed into a rule. I got up. I fed the horse. I started counting again because counting is how I keep from running, and I had a powerful urge to run. She didn't come out that morning, or the next. I want you to sit with that because I did, and it near broke me. 2 days and no smoke worth the name from the chimney, just a thin gray thread, then nothing. 2 days and the wash still hanging frozen stiff on the line, a dead man's shirt gone hard as a plank, and no light in the window at night. I knocked. I called. I said Nadine soft, and I said it loud. I told her I'd chopped wood and stacked it by her door. I told her the smokehouse was full and she'd not want for meat. I told her I wasn't going anywhere, which was less a comfort and more a fact of geography by then. Nothing. Just the wind and that low, wrong voice it made coming off the high snow, calling, calling, the sound that emptied 3 ranches. On the 3rd morning I did the thing I'd sworn I wouldn't. I opened her door. I'd like to tell you I agonized. I didn't. There's a point past which manners are a luxury, and a shut door is just a question of whether you find a person alive or find them the way I found my mother. And I have found enough people the second way to know I'd rather be a rude man than a too late one. The cabin was cold as the grave outside. Colder. She'd let the fire die. She was in the bed under every blanket in the house, and her lips were going blue at the edges, and she was breathing, I counted. God help me. It's what I do. She was breathing 9 times a minute, which is the breathing of somebody halfway out the door, and she wasn't asleep. Her eyes were open. She was staring at the ceiling, and her mouth was moving, and no sound was coming out. And I knew without hearing it what she was saying, because she'd said it to me in the yard. He'll be down before the snow. I built the fire. My hands shook, and it took me 3 tries, and I cursed, and I did it. I heated water. I got broth from the cow bones down her throat, a spoon at a time. Tilting her head, talking the whole while the way you talk to a colt in a burning barn, nonsense, just steady sound, there now, there, 1 more, good, that's good, 1 more. I don't remember what all I said. I remember I sang some. She'd have hated it if she'd been herself. My voice is thin and I never shut up. Maybe that's what pulled her back. Spite, even. A woman that proud, maybe she came back from the edge just to tell me to stop singing. Somewhere in the 2nd day of it, because it took 2 days, 2 days of broth and fire and me not sleeping more than an hour at a stretch, she came back enough to be angry, and angry was the most beautiful thing I ever saw. Color in her face, her hand knocking the spoon. Stop, she rasped. Stop fussing, I don't need. I know you don't, I said. Humor a fool, drink. She drank. She glared at me over the cup like she wanted me dead, and she drank every drop. And when it was gone, she turned her face to the wall and she said the thing that broke the dam. She said it small and flat and final, and she'd been carrying it so long it came out worn smooth, like a stone in a river. He's not coming down, is he? Not a question again. That was her way. She said the terrible things as facts so nobody, not even her own heart, could argue. I could have lied. There's men who'd tell you the kind thing is to lie. I sat down on the edge of that bed she let me. That was its own miracle, and I told her the truth, because I'd already broken into her house and her heart, and there was no clean way left, only the honest one. No, Nadine, he's not. She didn't cry. I keep telling you she was past crying, and I mean it, but I want you to understand it's not that she felt less. It's that she felt so much for so long alone that the crying had all been used up, months back, out by the barn with a shovel in the frozen ground. What she did was worse to watch than crying. She just went still, all over. Like something that had been wound tight for a year finally let go. And the letting go was almost the death of her, because the winding was the only thing that had kept her standing. Then in a whisper she told me, and this is the part I've never said out loud to another living soul, so lean in. His name was Eli. He was her husband, and he was, by her telling, a gentle man and a stubborn one, which is a hard pair to be. They'd bought Coldwater cheap because it was cursed, because Eli didn't believe in curses, because he believed a good ranch was a good ranch, and the fear of small men was just money left on the table for a brave one. And for a while, she said this with something that was almost a smile, the first I'd seen for a while they'd been happy, really happy. The kind you don't know to be grateful for until it's a photograph. Then the fever came through. The bad one, the winter of 2 years back that took whole towns. It took their 2 children first, a boy and a girl. She said their names once, and I'll not repeat them, they're hers, and it near took her. And Eli nursed her through it the way I just nursed her, broth and fire and no sleep, except he did it while burying his own children in ground too hard to dig, and something in him broke that never set right after. He got quiet. He'd go up the mountain. Days at a stretch hunting, he said, checking the high line, but she knew, she'd always known, he went up there to be where he could talk to the children without her watching him do it. And every time he went he'd say the same thing at the gate. I'll be down before the snow, Nadine. Keep the light in the window. And she would, every night. She kept that light. The last time he went up was a month ago. There'd been a rock slide, she'd heard it, that ticking rushing sound I'd heard my first morning, the mountain shedding its skin. He didn't come down that night, or the next, and on the third day she went up after him, a woman alone with a lantern, and she found him under the rock, and she stopped here. She stopped a long time. She found him, and he was gone, and she could not move the stone off him, not all of it. She was one small starving woman, and it was a mountain. And so she did the only thing she could. She took what she could reach of him, his coat, she said, his coat, and she pulled it tight around herself right there as she told me, and I understood at last whose coat it was and why she'd never take it off, and she buried what she could carry down. By the barn, deep, careful, 2 peeled saplings lashed with rawhide. And then she came back inside, and she kept the light in the window. And she did the wash and hung his shirt on the line and told herself and told the cow and told the wind and told, finally, a fool named Wren who followed buzzards, that he'd be down before the snow. Because if she stopped saying it, it was true. And if it was true, she was the last of them. The last of a family of 5 in a cursed draw at the bottom of the world, and there was no earthly reason left to build a fire or weed a garden, or keep on breathing 9 breaths a minute staring at a ceiling. She'd kept saying it. She'd kept the light. And keeping that impossible thing had been, I understood, the only rope she had, and she'd been climbing it hand over hand out over the dark for a solid month, and I had come down into the draw and cut it with the truth, because I thought the truth was kind. I have never in my life been less sure I'd done right. We didn't speak for a while after that. The fire ticked. The wind called off the snow. And then Nadine did something I did not expect, something that told me the mountain hadn't kept all of her after all. She sat up, slow, shaking, furious at her own weakness the whole way. She swung her feet down to the cold floor. And she said, cracked, hoarse, but with a spine of iron back in it that hadn't been there an hour ago. The far garden's not lost. Not all of it. There's turnips still in the ground under the straw. And the dry tank up the slope Eli always meant to run a line from the spring, but he never. Her voice caught on his name and she rode right over it, stubborn, spitting the catch. We could still. If a body knew how. Do you know how, Wren? Or do you just sing and follow buzzards? And God help me, I laughed. First laugh in that cabin in a year, I'd wager, and it startled us both. I know a little about water, I said. I know a little about most things and a lot about nothing, and I can dig a line if you'll boss me proper. I'll boss you proper, she said grimly. I've buried better men than you for less. It was, I think, the closest thing to a joke she'd made since the fever. It was terrible. I've never treasured anything more. I want to be honest with you, because I promised I would, all the way to the bottom of it. That night, the night she came back to herself. The night she decided to live out of pure spite and turnips. That night was the hardest of the whole business for me. And I need to tell you why, because it's the morally heavy thing, the one the good stories are supposed to have. And mine's real and it doesn't have a clean answer. I could have gone. The snow had let up. 3 days of cold sun and the draw would have been passable barely, if a man went light and went now and didn't look back. I had a horse. I had meat in my saddlebags. I had done more good than any 3 men who'd fled before me. I'd pulled her back from the edge, told her the truth she needed, put spine back in her by whatever accident of broth and bad singing. I could have ridden out with a clear conscience and a story to tell in 3 towns. The story of the woman waiting below and the fool who found her. And folks would have called me a good man for it, and I'd have half believed them. Or I could stay. Stay through a winter that would try its level best to kill us both. Stay in a cursed draw with a widow who'd buried everything she loved, and dig water lines in frozen ground, and eat turnips, and fail, probably, because the arithmetic was against us and I'm a man who counts and I knew the odds. Stay and maybe watch her die anyway in the spring, of the slow thing that's killing her that broth won't fix. The thing that hasn't got a name but I've seen it take stronger folks than her. The thing where a body keeps breathing after its reasons have all gone into the ground. Stay and get attached. That was the real fear if I'm honest to the bottom. Stay and let her matter and then lose her and add her to the number I can't forget. I stood in the barn a long time that clear cold night with my hand on Pete's warm neck, and the pass open, and my whole safe life waiting on the other side of it. I'm not going to tell you yet what I chose. I'll tell you what I did in the moment, which was smaller and truer than choosing. I looked up at the mountain. At the high dark timber where a gentle stubborn man lay under a stone too big for a starving woman to move. And I thought about Eli, saying at the gate, every time, keep the light in the window. And I thought he kept his own promise, didn't he? He came down before the snow. She just hadn't been able to bear which way. He came down in her arms with a lantern, and she carried what she could of him, and she kept the light. And the light had been for a dead man, but it had also, without her ever knowing it, been for me, burning down in that cursed draw, pulling the one fool in the territory who follows buzzards and doesn't break promises made in the dark. Somebody has to keep the light. That's the whole of it. That's the only wisdom I've got, and it cost me everything I have to learn it. Somebody has to keep the light, even for the ones who aren't coming down, because you never know who's up on the ridge in the cold, counting buzzards, deciding whether the world's got anything left in it worth riding toward. I went back inside. I banked the fire up high. She was asleep, real sleep, the first in a month, breathing 16 a minute, and I counted it, and it was the best number I'd had in years. The pass closed again 2 days later under a foot of new snow, and closed for good, and I was on the wrong side of it, and I have never once been sorry. But the winter hadn't started yet, not the real winter. The mountain was still just clearing its throat. By January, the smokehouse was more than half empty, and I'd stopped telling Nadine how much was left, and she'd caught me not telling her, which was worse than if I'd just said it, because now she knew I'd tried to spare her, and she despised being spared above almost anything. We fought about it. First real fight. She threw a tin cup at my head, missed. On purpose, I think. She didn't miss things. And told me she'd survived a fever that took her bobbies and a month of burying her husband a piece at a time. And she did not need a singing fool doing her sums behind her back. And if we were going to starve, she'd by God like to starve with the numbers in front of her where she could argue with them. So I gave her the numbers, all of them. Every night after that, we did the arithmetic together at the table by the one candle, meat and grain and turnips and days till the pass, and it should have been the grimmest hour of the day, and somehow it became the one I lived for. Two people with a pencil and a hopeless sum, refusing to look away from it. I'd never had that. I'd counted alone my whole life. Turns out the counting's different when there's someone across the table saying do it again. You carried wrong. Even when you didn't carry wrong, even when she just wanted the sum to come out kinder and was daring the world to make it so. We ran the water line in December before the ground went iron. Took us 9 days. She bossed me proper like she'd promised. She knew that spring and that slope better than I knew my own hands. Eli had walked her over every foot of it, planning the thing he never built. We built it. Cold, half-starved, her stopping every hour to lean on the shovel and catch a breath that came harder each week. But we built it, and on the 9th day the water ran down into the dry stock tank for the first time, and Nadine stood there watching it fill, and she put her hand over her mouth, and she made a sound I hadn't heard from her, not grief. The other thing. The thing grief's shaped like from behind. He wanted this, she said. 2 years he wanted this. He got it, I said. You got it. It's running, Nadine. Look at it run. She looked at it run. And then she looked at me, and there was a question in it she didn't ask and I didn't answer, because we were both too proud and too scared, and it wasn't time. And I've learned some things you don't rush even when the days are short. Here's the setback. I told you there'd be one. I count things so I'll tell it to you the way it came, in order, no softening. It was the last week of January when Nadine started coughing. Not a cold. I knew the sound. Everybody who lived through the fever winters knows the sound, deep and wet and rooted, the cough that isn't in the throat but in the chest, in the works of a person. The same thing that took her children. It had been in her the whole time, I think, banked low like a fire, waiting for her to be weak enough. And a winter of turnips and grief and shovel work in the cold had finally banked her low enough. I did everything. Understand that. I did every single thing I knew, and some things I invented, and some things I prayed over, which I'm not a praying man. Broth and steam and the last of the honey and my own body's heat when the fever spiked and she shook. I moved my blanket to the floor by her bed, and I didn't sleep more than that first bad night with her, weeks back. I counted her breathing through the dark, all night, every night, the way I'd counted my mother, the number I've spent my life running from, and I held onto the counting like it was a rope I could keep her tied to. And she fought. God, she fought. That woman fought the fever the way she'd fought everything, with spite, with turnips, with a flat refusal to let the terrible thing be true just because it was true. There was a night, deep in it, when the fever had her talking to Eli, to the children, calling their names, reaching for hands that weren't there, and I sat and held her reaching hands in mine and let her think they were whoever she needed, and if that's a sin I'll answer for it gladly. And there was a morning, right at the bottom, when I truly thought I'd lost her, when her breathing went to 6 and then to a number I won't say, and I put my mouth by her ear and I did the only thing I had left. I didn't beg her to live. She'd have spited begging. I said, Nadine, the tank's near froze over. Watch her lines gonna crack if somebody don't go break the ice, and I don't know the slope like you do, and I'll do it wrong, and you'll have to lie there knowing I did it wrong. So And I swear to you, I swear on my mother, her breathing came up, just a little, out of pure contempt for the idea of me doing it wrong. 7 breaths, then 9. Then, hours later, a rasped, furious whisper, eyes still shut. You'll flood the far garden, you always overdo. Go slow, you fool. I went and broke the ice, slow, and when I came back she was asleep, real sleep, and the fever had turned. She lived. I need you to know she lived, because I've told you a lot of hard things and I won't leave you hanging on that one. The fever broke and she came back, thinner, grayer, a cough that never fully left her after, but she came back. It was March by the time she could stand at the door on her own. And the day she stood there in Eli's coat, cuffs turned back 3 times, watching the water run down to the tank in the thin spring sun, she said the thing that ends this, or near enough. She said without looking at me, "You should have gone back in October. The pass was open. I saw you standing in the barn that night. I watched you decide." So she'd known. All along she'd known I nearly rode out and left her. And she'd never said, and she'd let me stay. And she'd bossed me and fought me and thrown a cup at my head and come back from the dead out of spite, knowing. "I know," I said. "Why didn't you go?" I could have said 100 things. I could have made it noble. I'm telling you the truth all the way down, so here's what I actually said, standing in a cursed draw at the bottom of the world beside a widow in a dead man's coat, with the water running and the pass just barely open again behind us. "Somebody has to keep the light in the window," I said. "I saw yours from the ridge, all the way down here, burning for a man who wasn't coming, and I thought, well, if she'll keep a light for the dead, maybe she's got sense enough to let a live fool warm his hands at it." She was quiet a long time. The water ran. Somewhere the first bird of the spring said something hopeful and got no answer. "The pass is open," she said at last, flat. A fact set down where neither of us could argue with it. "You could go now, nothing keeping you. Meat'll last me to the thaw and the tank's running, and I've bossed you into being some use around a ranch." A breath, that cough low. "You could go, Wren." And there it was. She was doing it again, the thing she does, the thing I told you about back at the very start, the first thing I ever knew for certain about her. She would rather look cruel than look weak. She would rather hand me the open door than let me see her ask me to stay. She'd buried 5 people and she was not going to stand there and beg a 6th to not become the 6th, so she gave me the pass. She gave me the open door and the clear conscience and the road home, and she made it sound like she wanted me gone. And her hands, I watched them. Her hands were white-knuckled on the frame of the door. I've thought a long time about what a better man would have done. A smarter man. A man who counts the odds and knows a widow with a rooted cough in a cursed draw is a number that only goes one way in the end, sooner or later, and knows too that he'll be there to count her breathing down when it does, the way he counted his mother, the number he spent his whole life running from. I thought about all of it, standing there, the way I'd thought about it in the barn in October. Then I did the arithmetic one last time, out loud, so she'd have the numbers in front of her where she could argue with them, the way she liked. "Well," I said, "passes open, that's 1. Meat to the thaw, that's 2. Tanks running, 3. I counted them on my fingers, the old habit, and my voice was doing the thin thing it does, and I let it. "And there's a far garden needs planting come the thaw, and a woman who knows the slope but can't hardly haul a bucket up it no more, that's 4 and 5. And a fool who follows buzzards and can't do sums alone any more 'cause he's got used to somebody across the table telling him he carried wrong." I ran out of fingers. I put my hand down. "Comes out to staying, Nadine, however I count it, comes out to staying." She didn't say anything. She couldn't, I think. She reached out, slow, shaking, furious at her own weakness the whole way, the way she does everything. And she took my counting hand in both of hers, and she held it, hard, the grip of a woman who's held onto a rope over the dark for a year, and just felt somebody take the weight off the other end. We stood in the door like that a long while. The water ran down to the tank. The mountain sat above us with its stone and its snow and its one buried gentle man, and it didn't feel cursed anymore, or it did. But the curse and the blessing had gotten so tangled I couldn't count them apart, and I decided I didn't need to. That night I kept the light in the window. Not for the dead. For anybody up on the ridge in the cold, counting buzzards, trying to decide whether the world's got